LGBT, QXYZ, MTF34, SCP, hashtag, epsilon. LGBT people have had a rocky history to say the least, having had to live in the shadows and communicate through code for most of history. Bona Tavada your dolly will leak. So when film as a medium finally came out, a medium that allowed filmmakers to tell any story that people had never heard before, LGBT people finally got the representation they needed, right? Right? LGBT people, and really most demographics that have been historically discriminated against, have had a rough time making it to the big screen, from being walking stereotypes and mistaken for gay jokes, to having queerness be synonymous with or representative of villainy, and being portrayed as inherently sad or worth pitying.
I'm guilty!
And though a lot of us in the modern times like to think that we've learned from our bigoted past now that discrimination is mostly illegal, we still have echoes and remnants of the past. Today, we're going to take a look at LGBT portrayals throughout the history of film. Our story begins when film as a medium began to take off in the early 1900s. Contrary to what you might think, there were LGBT portrayals in film since the beginning. In fact, Wings, the first film to ever win Best Picture in 1927, featured a same-sex kiss of friendship between two men. And it's not played as a joke. If anything, it's an anguished goodbye between two people who cared about each other very much. Honestly, going into this project, I really didn't expect to find out that some film from almost 100 years ago has more LGBT representation than a lot of films today claim to. But don't let me give the early films too much credit. For the most part, gay characters weren't characters who happened to be gay. They were walking, and after the inclusion of sound, talking stereotypes.
And don't wear them.
Selfish.
I should mention that at this point, it was mostly just L and G, which people considered synonymous with T. And honestly, just pick a lane. Gay men were associated with being overly effeminate. Gay women or lesbians, on the other hand, were much more masculine acting, often dressing like men. It's pretty plain to see how these stereotypes have remained today, as the typical image a lot of people still have of gay people is that they're just men who act like women, or vice versa. Is this good LGBT representation? Hell no, but at least it's visibility, which is the first step in getting people to accept something. I'd like to take a detour here to talk about actual queer film, which was a pleasant surprise for me to find in this time period. One film I discovered while researching for this video was a bit different from the others. Anders als die Andern, literally different from the others, was a film made in Germany in 1919, and some consider it to be the first pro-gay film ever made. The plot of Different from the Others focuses on a famous violinist's affair with his young protege. After being recognized by someone who bumps into them on the street, they end up being blackmailed, and one of them commits suicide as a result. This film features a rebuke against families that don't accept their gay children, rails against a law in Germany at the time that made homosexuality a criminal offense, and even has an ex-gay hypnotherapist portrayed as a charlatan. Calling it progressive for its time is a criminal understatement. Unfortunately, when the Nazis came to power in Germany, many of the original prints of this film were censored and destroyed. What we have today is only a partial reconstruction. Check the description for a link. Other examples of films that outright tackled LGBT themes from around this time period were Ich mochte kein, that, and Salami, an adaptation of an Oscar Wilde play of the same name, which is even rumored to have featured an all-gay cast. But this gone, gilded age couldn't last forever. Much like my teenage years, things changed when the Great Depression hit. People had less money to spend on seeing movies, so the audience for them naturally shrank. In response, studios upped the shock value in films to get asses into seats. And what could shock an audience more than the gays? One infamous example of being used as shock value is the 1932 film The Sign of the Cross, where Emperor Nero has an almost fully nude male slave around him at all times, and it also features a man who... What? Sign of the Cross features a man trying to seduce a woman by recruiting another woman into performing an erotic lesbian dance. What? Obviously, the purpose of this wasn't to normalize homosexuality. The point of using gay subtext in the Sign of the Cross was to point out how much better we modern Christians with values were than those decadent, horny Romans. And also because sex sells. While this obviously wasn't a great time for homosexual representation in film, I mean, at least it was there. The same can't be said for the era that followed a moral outrage about films like Sign of the Cross. Enter the Hays Code. The Hays Code was Hollywood's attempt to self-regulate in response to the backlash from conservative groups in America, and it banned film portrayals of prostitution, profanity, and other forms of what were perceived to be vice in film, including white slavery.
Non-white slavery was fine though, I guess. Sorry, non-white people.
And sexual perversion, which, at the time, included all things homosexual. In this new era of film, there were only a few ways to get away with showing LGBT themes or characters. One was to smother them in subtext.
Gardenia.
Why is Joel Cairo, a character who is homosexual in the book version of the Maltese Falcon, always fondling his cane? Is it because he wishes the cane was Sam Spade's sexy bod? Why is he sucking on his cane? Making characters like this, who we recognize as showing gay behaviors even if no reference is actually made to their sexuality, is called queer coding. Another way of getting homosexuality past the censors was to make the queer-coded characters evil. Alfred Hitchcock's Rope practically ditches the sub part of subtext. For Brandon and Philip, murder is associated with sex. The exchange after hiding their victim's body is very reminiscent of a post-coital conversation.
Not just yet. Let's stay this way for a minute.
You can even identify the active and passive parts that are commonly stereotyped in gay relationships. Them being subtextually gay is meant to make the white, straight audience feel uneasy around them and more readily accept them as villains.
Alfred Hitchcock, you've got a lot of nerve making the antagonists of Rope two queer-coded men when your name is literally... Well, let's move on.
Another movie that illustrates this pretty well is Dracula's Daughter, a movie which is pretty much what it sounds like. Look at how the shots are framed, and notice the suggestive looks the title character shoots at her young victim.
I suppose you'll want these pulled down, won't you? Yes. Why are you looking at me that way?
Even the music and lines indicate something suggestive is happening, and the tone it sets is clear even though no one acknowledges it. Dracula's Daughter is clearly meant to invoke the concept of a predatory lesbian corrupting our good, wholesome women. This film also points out a double standard between LGBT men and LGBT women in films. The people who censored the films, and really most of the people watching them, were men, and either had no idea how to identify female homosexuality, or turned a blind eye to it because it was more appealing when women did it. Across the pond, however, LGBT people finally got their big break in Victim.
I stopped seeing him because I wanted him. Do you understand? Because I wanted him!
A film about a gay man who ends up as the subject of blackmail, and then his lover commits suicide and... Wait a minute. This is just the same plot as different from the others.
I guess different from the others was a victim of plagiarism.
When the regulations that led to the villainous portrayals of LGBT people started to crumble, you would think that their portrayal would get better, right? Nope. Enter a new stereotype, the self-hating gay,
Hashtag relatable.
who dies or commits suicide over the course of the movie.
Hashtag ideally not relatable.
I have been with a man. Did you hear me? Which is a sin against nature, a sin against God.
Even in cases where the gay character was sympathetic, the focus was usually on curing the homosexuality. The effeminate guy has to man up.
LGBT people weren't just regular monsters anymore. They were almost like werewolves or vampires. They were creatures of the night that you could become unwillingly, and to have a dark and perverted desire forced upon you.
The thought of turning involuntarily into one of them, frightened me and made me sick with anger.
And just like any of those evil monsters, they can't have a happy ending. They're evil, they're dark, they're twisted, they could be hiding among any of us, and they have to pay!
Finally, in the 70s, when everybody was starting to get, like, totally cool, dude, LGBT people finally got their big break. The first film to break the mold was called Boys in the Band.
Instead of seeing gay people from the perspective of someone who would do anything not to be one, we get the point of view of gay people who have found a place where they feel comfortable. And even though not everything is perfect, it's uplifting. Some of the self-hating gay stereotypes are even confronted and critiqued.
You're a homosexual and you don't want to be. But there's nothing you can do to change it. Not all your prayers to your God. Not all the analysis you can buy and all the years you've got left to live. You may very well one day be able to know a heterosexual life, if you want it desperately enough, if you pursue it with the fervor with which you annihilate. But you'll always be homosexual as well.
This was just the start of LGBT characters, really still mostly just L and G at this point, finally getting positive representation in films. And although there were still queer-coded villains and monsters,
paranormal, is that what they're calling your kind these days?
For the most part, things were looking up.
Why don't you just say it?
I'm gay.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'd like to get a taste of Harry's Hamlet. And that more or less brings us to today, where we're finally starting to get films that actually tell the stories of LGBT people, like Moonlight and Gay TikToks to Watch at 3 a.m. Part 34. But now that I've basically summarized the celluloid closet for you, let's move on to what gay representation is like today.
When portrayals of characters that were explicitly LGBT were finally allowed, all of the tropes that have been used didn't just go away overnight. In fact, a lot of them have stuck around to today. And surprise, surprise, it still happens to villains a lot.
If you will but kneel at mine.
Disney in particular is a big offender for this, as they often use sensational male villains that accentuate their rugged masculine heroes. Even some of their secondary characters, friends to the heroes and often comic relief characters in particular, play into the sissy and prissy tropes. These characters act gay and often never show interest in characters of the opposite sex. In more mature films, where filmmakers can just say that the character is gay, things are a little different. In some cases, this has led to exploration and critique of the queer coding tropes, and some characters have even become LGBT icons as a result. In other cases, nothing changes but the acknowledgement that the character is gay. It's not all bad, however. In more recent years, in some movies and quite a few TV shows, we've seen actual exploration of LGBT stories. We're also finally starting to see more characters in mainstream media that aren't just there to be a gay joke or foil, but characters that are characters first, with their sexual orientation as coincidental. Hollywood and television producers are finally recognizing that there is an audience for gay characters, gay stories, and gay romances that aren't just jokes or stereotypes.
And when Hollywood identifies a new audience for something, they always follow the golden rule. You know, follow the gold and rule.
Even when it isn't explicitly gay, queer coding is sometimes turned on its head so that we can have a genuine love story between two characters that aren't romantically linked.
Did you just smell me?
Difficult to avoid.
Sometimes they don't even say no homo.
Will Graham. More like Will Dam.
However, the normalization of LGBT people in media has also led to a new form of queer coding, one that is seemingly well-intentioned, but in reality, just as frustrating or even more to the gay community than the villainous or comical queer coding, queer baiting. This is when a gay subplot or romance is hinted at in the medium, when in reality, the producers have no intentions of developing or delivering on it.
So you also like boys?
Absolutely. Do you?
I said I love you.
Yes, finally. This is what I've been waiting for. What the hell? Oh no, I've been queer baited.
If the dynamic between two same-sex characters would definitely result in a relationship if they were a man and a woman, it's possible that you've been queer-baited. Alternatively, a character could be hinted at or outright stated to be bisexual, but they only ever get into straight affection in relationships. This happens because even though LGBT portrayals in media are allowed now, doing it is still kind of risky because of stupid reactionaries, people who have values and stuff.
Cash, get out of my ass!
I was never in your...
What separates queerbaiting from platonic same-sex love stories is usually the payoff, intention, and setup. If there's homoerotic subtext between two characters that serves to strengthen the show, it's usually fine. But if it's just a bunch of haha you two look like a couple jokes, or characters being comically placed in usually romantic situations, it's more likely to be queerbaiting. Or, as is common in some recent Disney films like Avengers Endgame and Star Wars 9, the studio might claim they're finally adding representation, only to have it be a one-off line or 2-second scene. In a best-case scenario, queerbaiting helps to build up a following for a show or movie by appealing to an LGBT audience. In practice, though, it often ends up pissing them off by not delivering, and also pissing off the moral gatekeepers who don't like the icky gay people.
So really, the best solution is just to stop doing it. Just let Castiel and Dean be gay with each other. Fuck! I'm fine. Do I want every character in TV and movies to be gay? Yes.
And they will be.
But in the meantime, queerbaiting characters, relationships, and pairings that the writers have no intention of following through with is not the correct way to build an LGBT audience for your work. At least, not one with a positive opinion of it.
And that's pretty much where we are today. We've come a long way, and maybe we still have a ways to go. But looking back today, it's great to see how far we've come as a society, and use film as a mirror to see that.
And even though I've been a little hard on the history of film today, the people whose efforts contributed to LGBT themes and people becoming more normal in our society should not and will not be forgotten. Here's to you guys. It's empty. I've fooled you all. I'm a charlatan, a fraudster. What? Even the can that I poured it into it's empty too. Except for like maybe a little drop. I've fooled you all. I'm a charlatan. But that shout out wasn't a joke. Thank you all very much.